Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, brains behind the business. It's your front row seat to the business elite. New episodes twice a week.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm your host, flying solo today, Susan Hobson. Rob's out giving a keynote this week, and so I have the privilege of interviewing and introducing you all to Alex Edmans. He is a TED speaker, as well as a professor of finance at London School of Business. He has his PhD from MIT, as a Fulbright scholar. He was a tenured professor previously at Wharton, and as well worked at Morgan Stanley as an investment banker. Alex Edmans, it's so lovely to have you in studio. Welcome to the show. Where I'd love to begin is to just plug our audience into you and the backstory in terms of who you are and the mission that you're on in this world.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Susan, for having me on. It's great to be here. So as you said, my day job is a professor of finance at London Business School, but I really try to marry the academic and the practitioner world. So in addition to teaching and doing academic research, I really like to interact with policymakers, practitioners, executives, and investors. And how I do that. Number one might be through my talks, like my TED Talks. Number two, to my books, and those books are for general audiences. And number three is through advisory roles, such as a non-executive director or on some advisory boards. And so why do I want to do this? What is my mission? My mission is to use rigorous academic research, but not just to sit in a library, but instead to influence the practice of business. So I like to translate academic scientific ideas and make them practical. And importantly, not just my own research, but the research of a whole community of scholars. So it doesn't matter whether I wrote it or somebody else wrote it. If it's relevant, I try to make sure it gets across.
Amazing. And what do you feel like inspired you to go on your academic research in the first place? If we could rewind the game tape all the way back and remember some of that initial inspiration for you, what would that be?
So my job as an investment banker, I really liked. So you have people who used to work at Morgan Stanley or other firms and worked really hard and don't have good memories. I have some really good memories of my time there. I worked with some great people, learned a lot. However, we would work on the problems of one particular client. So it might be I'd have a particular client raise capital or sell a company. And I thought the bandwidth of your contribution might be much broader if you did something which was research oriented or if you wrote. So while I was at Morgan Stanley, I used to read the research notes done by the chief economist or the chief strategist about whether to invest in emerging markets or the UK. And that's something which I thought was really fascinating. Anybody could read that. It wasn't just one particular client. And so I thought, well, if you're an academic, if you give a talk, that could be watched by millions of people. And that was before the days of TED. And now you can reach huge audiences. And similarly with books, if you write a book or if you write an important paper about a driver of company success, that could be timeless. So it was the bandwidth, broader contributions that led to me doing what I do now.
Amazing. And let's dig into some of those contributions now, shall we? Let's talk about your TED Talk and some of the contributions that you were able to make via that talk. What do you feel like were some of the biggest impacts and influences that you saw ensuing from being able to deliver that thought leadership to the world?
Yeah, so let's talk. So there was 3 TEDx talks I've given, of which one was promoted to a TED Talk main stage. But let me just talk about the first 2.
Yeah.
So next talk called The Social Responsibility of Business. And that
let's talk about that.
Should serve society, not just because it's good for the world and good for the planet, but it's good
for business. Yeah.
So this takes a topic which is often seen as fluffy and nice, accused of as being woke, and says, no, as a hard-headed business person, as an ex-investment banker, I'm saying actually sustainability is something that you should truly embed in your business because it makes companies more profitable in the long term. That developed into a book called Grow the Pie. And so what Pie is, many business leaders said they've read the book, they've invited me to give talks about implementing it within their company to try to make sustainability mainstream. The other talk I gave, which was promoted to a main stage TED Talk, was called What to Trust in a Post-Truth World. And that was a rather unusual talk. So normally when an academic is invited to give a TED or TEDx talk, he or she presents their research. It's a great ability to market your research on a wider stage. But I had felt that when I had delivered the findings of research to practitioners, often how they responded to it would be based on whether they liked it, not on whether it was accurate. So they would say it's the world's best research. If they didn't like the findings, if it made them uncomfortable, if it went against what they wanted to be true, they... And so I wanted to talk about confirmation bias, how our biases, our existing viewpoints lead us to believing something even if it's flimsy, and something even if it's rigorous. So the talk, What to Trust in a Post-Truth World, was about how careful we need to be about where we have strong opinions, and that developed into a new book released earlier this year called May Contain Lies: How Stories, Statistics, and Studies Exploit Our Biases and What We Can Do About It. And again, I think something which has influenced people. It's made them think twice about many things. I know that sometimes people are posting on LinkedIn, they're referring to some of the phrases I use in the book. So I know that correlation is not causation. I'm not going to claim that everybody who now pursues sustainability did it because of my book or talk, nor that everybody who thinks more critically does it because of my book and talk, but it has had some influence. I'm clearly not the only person writing on these issues, but it's good for me. It's great for to join the community of people to move towards more sustainability and move towards more critical thinking.
Yeah, I feel like this is a big topic on our show because our approach to leadership development is through developing the leader's mindset, which requires a lot of exposing, shall we say, of a leader's unconscious biases. So I know that that's what you're referring to there. What would your suggestion be to leaders that are listening that maybe are not so prepared to want to look at those unconscious biases for the possibility of them being wrong? We see a lot of that in terms of the resistance when we're actually coaching these leaders, but what would your advice to them be?
My advice would be that everybody has biases. I do myself. So in the book, I explain many times in which I fell for misinformation because of my own biases. So we often think biases that might happen if you're a strong climate change denier or if you're really anti-immigration, but even biases can affect our decisions. And this is high. So it could be that you're someone at BP and you think, oh, my Deepwater Horizon is really safe, so I'm going to ignore the warning signals. Maybe at Silicon Valley Bank, I think, oh, my risk models are really, really good. I can't possibly go bankrupt. And so that is something where the stakes are high to address those biases. We often think nowadays of diversity or diversity inclusion, but this is sometimes reduced to demographic diversity when diversity of thinking. So it's not enough to bring in a broad mix of genders and ethnicities, but really listen to different viewpoints, actually actively encourage different viewpoints, particularly if you're senior. It may well be that the people who report to you are maybe reticent to challenge you. So try to take active steps in order to encourage people to express different views.
And that in and of itself, I feel like is the biggest reason why a leader cannot afford not to question their unconscious biases, right? Because if we don't actually have a sight line of awareness in terms of what it is that we believe, then how do we in fact know that we aren't the ones that are running interference on the things that we're actually trying to impact and influence as leaders, right? And so one of the things that I know we use a lot, Alex, is you do have this bit of research where you were able to prove, right, that, for instance, high trust companies oftentimes, I think, have a 2 to 3% higher stock return, right, than the high fear, low trust companies. And so, yeah, just even being able to expose leaders to that type of research, that data, that proof and evidence, oftentimes is enough to shift those unconscious biases in and of themselves. So why is that one, I feel like, one that people have such a hard time believing, though? Like, why is that something that we would even need to do so much research on? The fact that high trust companies, of course, are going to have better business outcomes. Why do leaders battle that so much?
Well, I think that there's a couple of reasons, some a bit more sensible than others. So I think the rational reason is people think, okay, yes, trust might matter sort of intellectually, but as a practical matter, doesn't matter when there's so many other things which can drive motivation. So let's say in my job at Morgan Stanley, the pay was really high. So for a junior person, the incentives for bonuses and the incentives for promotion were so high that didn't matter how well you were treated, shouldn't the career aspirations be enough to get people to work hard? And it wasn't enough, because at the end of the day, you're people, you're not coin operated, and it really matters whether you are valued and treated. So actually on LinkedIn today, I announced that I am rejoining Morgan Stanley to be on their sustainability advisory board for their
Oh, wow.
investing. I am absolutely thrilled
Yeah.
joining. Why? Because I have such positive memories of Morgan Stanley. I think I have about over 1,000 likes and positive reactions to it, and which is probably the second highest performing post in terms of engagement. There's many of my ex-colleagues at Morgan Stanley are like writing comments and their memories, and I think it does really make a difference how you're treated, even though it shouldn't. If you think rationally, the financial incentives were so high that they should have been enough of a driver. So I think that's the more sort of sensible reason. People don't think it matters is because, well, there's other factors going on. A sensible reason is thinking that, okay, even if it does matter, how can I prove correlation or causation? Is treating employees well leads to companies doing better? Or is it, if the company's doing better, it can start treating employees well? And I try to get around that conundrum and suggest it's the first direction. If you treat employees well, then the company does better. The third, and I think the more that maybe I would say this is the reason I might bite into less, is there is a view out there that the value that a company creates is a fixed pie. So actually, the way that a company becomes more profitable is if you take pie away from workers, then there's more profits to be given to shareholders. And so this is why there are some companies which are known for working their employees really hard, paying them based on the fixed pie mindset. It's incorrect. Is the pie is not fixed. It can be grown. That's why my first book is called Grow the Pie. If you're delivering value to your employees, they're more motivated, more productive, more likely to ultimately, this is good for profits down the line.
Amazing. What do you feel like in all these years of researching trust, you have been able to ascertain are some of the biggest destroyers of trust that you see leaders make the mistake of engaging in behaviorally? Let's put that on our leaders' radar.
I'd say it's the short-term mindset, because even if, say, intellectually and conceptually, you know that you should be treating your employees better, you should be investing in them, you don't want to overwork them and risk burnout. If you have a short client demand or short-term deadline or the desire to hit a quarterly earnings target, then you may say, okay, I'm not going to bother to make that investment. And this is because they're bad people. It's like there's a lot of research out there saying you should exercise more and you should drink less alcohol and eat less sugary food. But if this is being put in front of you, or it's a outside and you should be going for a run, then you're tempted by it. And so short-termism we see outside of the office, we also are pursuing within the office. So this is, for me, I try to make sure that the decisions I make outside of work are also reflecting the decisions I like to make within work, so that I don't have to switch between two different personas. I think that's difficult to do. So you want to have a consistent approach to all the way that you approach all decisions.
And how has all of this understanding informed or even changed your personal leadership style over the years?
So this highlights to me the importance of a long-term mindset. And we're very lucky because I was instilled this from a very young age. So my dad taught me to play chess when I was 5 years old, because he used to play himself. I played for the England junior team when I was about 10 and 11, but then I'm not so strong anymore. But that was something I did play to a high level at some point. And that's you have to think many, many moves ahead. You can't just next move. And as a young kid, maybe 5 years old, you do have to sit down and think and not be impulsive. And then around the time I first started having piano lessons, and like music is something where you have to put a lot of practice in. get good. You don't see the payoff immediately. Any parent of a young child trying to play the violin will know from the screeches that it will take many years before he or she becomes good. But again, where in the short term you don't have the benefit, but you do in the long term. And then that much more so maybe from my teenage years onwards, I've got much more into sports and fitness and exercise. That's something I absolutely love. I'm really passionate about, and I always try to instill to my students at London Business School. And that is something where it's really easy to say you're too busy to work out. But this morning, the first thing I did is I did a tough workout class, and then I had various meetings throughout the day. But I felt I had already won a victory in doing this difficult class. It gave me a lot of energy for the rest of the day. It's late in the evening now in the UK when we're filming this podcast, but I still have a lot of energy because I think I started the day right. So I think, again, fitness is something where short term there's some pain, but I think there's a good long term benefit down the line.
I absolutely agree. From my sporting background, it definitely teaches you how to really trust and own the process and see those outcomes kind of take care of themselves in the long run, doesn't it?
It does, and I think what you mentioned there, ownership, to own the process is really important, because there's some like I really love team sport, but also in something individual. Let's say running a half marathon or running a 10K. You have a target for what time you want to do. And if you don't reach your target, it is your fault. You can't blame the referee. You can't blame your teammates, because you. And I think that is really good. And I think this will, you also see with any other type of fitness. So let's say you're lifting weights. You can see the progression from lifting a 10K dumbbell to a 15K dumbbell or a 12.5K dumbbell. You can see that progress. You can also see progress if I'm holding a plank for longer, or let's say you're doing yoga, you're holding a crow pose for longer.
Yeah.
And that's something where, because there's tangible signs of progress, within you a growth mindset, and then you can take that to your professional lives. You might be a public speaker, but I can work on that. I'm not a natural salesperson, but I can work on my sales skills. If you do that with other really good important things that you could work on. So I love music, but it's harder to measure how good you are as a violinist. You don't have the same quantitative measures as you do with the length of the time holding a plank, your 10K run, or bells that you lift. And so it might not instill the same growth mindset as something with a quantitative measure such as sport. So that's why I'm a huge fan of sports and exercise. In addition to, obviously, there's the physical benefits, but I think there's a lot of mental benefits as well in terms of instilling a growth mindset. So
what I hear you pointing out, which I totally agree with, it's a lot easier to trust that process when it's you alone owning it. So how do we bridge that gap as leaders of teams then? How do we instill that growth mindset amongst our teammates so that we all can trust the process that we are collaboratively, collectively owning together as a team?
I think it involves living out that growth mindset. So you might live out that growth mindset yourself. So sometimes it may well be that you have to do a task which you might not have been suited to. Maybe you don't have prior experience in it, but this is a challenge. So for me, I'd spent most of my life writing academic papers to be published in academic journals. Now I write books for general audiences. So my last book was published with Penguin Random House, and that obviously involves writing in a much clearer and less jargon-filled way. But also it involves having the growth mindset with your colleagues. So there's a quote from the book, The 1 Minute Manager, which is...
I remember that one.
It might sound a bit harsh, but let me read out the quote. Everyone is a potential winner. Some people are disguised as losers. Don't let their appearances fool you. And so what's behind that quote is, like, everybody in your team has great potential, but sometimes that potential might not immediately be apparent to you. And if it's not apparent, then it's probably your fault for not seeing the gold in that particular person. So unless you think your hiring department always makes bad decisions, and probably you as the senior person had a role in the hiring, like there was something that led you to giving this person a job, and if you don't see then that their value, maybe that it's something that you need to try to recognize and call out yourself. And I'm not going to say that every single person will be good at every single thing, but you give that person the opportunity to try and maybe fail, or maybe they try and they succeed, then you will never know. And so in my first year at Morgan Stanley, I was taken to a meeting in Q8, which was such an important meeting that the European head of healthcare was not able to go to it. So there was really senior people, like the global head of investment banking worldwide. But they took me to the meeting, even though it was a really senior meeting, and they had me present part of the slide deck to the client. And that, as a first journalist, was an amazing experience. And then from that, they realized that I had some ability to present despite being so junior. And so then in my second year, I was then given much more client interaction than maybe the typical second year analyst would have been given.
I love that story. It's such positive proof and evidence that totally backs that up. It's possible, right, to bring that into a collective experience. It requires a lot of that same level of trust, which is where I want to go next. Is the thing that I think that makes that most challenging is when we're in spaces and places of uncertainty, right? And so with everything we have coming down this pipeline with AI, right, the state of the world economy, there's so much uncertainty for leaders to navigate this day and age. What would your advice be to those leaders listening who are trying to prepare for what's coming down the pipeline that feels so uncertain in 2025 and beyond?
Oh, I think first is to just be aware. It's just to try to look for information sources to see, well, what are the important trends on the horizon, but also to have a materiality filter to understand which are the ones which are going to be material to your business and which are the ones which will not. So you are a leader with finite time and finite resources. It's going to be important? Yes. Is it going to be important to every single industry? Not necessarily. And AI comprises many, many, many different things. And so even if you think AI is important, well, what are the particular AI issues that you want to learn about and which might not be so important? So first, cast your net widely to look at the spread, the sphere of potential issues, but recognize that it is not your responsibility to know every single thing in the world, but the most material to your company's business. So for me, as a finance professor, I want to learn about a lot of sustainability trends because they have lots of financial implications, but I don't teach AI or big data to my students, not because it's not important, but because there's other professors who teach that. I focus on the current business challenges that I think are most relevant for my core expertise of finance.
Control the controllables and own the knowledge in and around how that change pertains to you and your business.
Yeah.
I love it. Alex, before we let you go, tell us about this book that you just released, Grow the Pie, and tell our leaders why they got to get out this door and go purchase that book right away. What's this book about?
Thanks. So Grow the Pie was actually one I published in 2020, but it's still hopefully highly relevant today, and new translations come out all the time. So that is about the power of sustainability. So we often think that sustainability, it's a nice to have, it's good for people, planet, but it's not good for a company's performance. And this is why there's somewhat of a backlash against sustainability in the US, particularly among some Republicans who claim to be the party of big business. And I'm saying that sustainability is good for business. It grows the pie. It benefits not only society, but also it benefits shareholders. It improves profit. So if you are somebody who's a big supporter of business, you should absolutely embrace sustainability. So it's a business case for sustainability. It's not a moral and ethical case. And so a business leader, an investor, an executive will hopefully find this of interest. But the book that I did just release is called Make and How Stories, Statistics, and Studies Exploit Our Biases and What We Can Do About It. That is with Penguin Random House. So it's hopefully a very fun read. It's quite lighthearted. It talks about misinformation, which is not a lighthearted topic. You might think it's going to be full of data and statistics, but I discuss this in lots of fields. Some are business fields, but others are in parenting, breastfeeding, diet, health advice, and science, what the forms of misinformation are, and more importantly, what are the practical steps that we can take to combat them.
Wow, definitely relevant to everything us leaders are navigating here in real time in 2024, especially as somebody who spends her day job working through all of those unconscious biases in a leader's mindset. I feel like that one is a must-have for our audience. Alex, where we started this interview was talking about how the inspiration behind this whole mission that you're on was that you wanted to be able to spread that ripple effect in terms of contribution, service, impact to the world via your thought leadership, right? So my final question for you today is, what would you like the legacy of all of that mission you're on in the world to be someday?
I think it was to have an impact on the practice of business through rigorous research. So we often like to listen to some gurus or one particular anecdote or some weak study because we like the findings, but I'd like to encourage people to be critical, to be discerning, not to be cynical, but to be discerning with what they trust, what they don't. And importantly, a lot of the issues that I tackle are often seen as black and white. So businesses and capitalism is always bad, for example, or sustainability is always good, but I'm trying to highlight this nuance in issues which are often portrayed as black and white.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here, Alex Edmans. Everybody, you can find more information on him at his website, alexedmans.com. You can also follow him on LinkedIn, as we heard earlier in this interview. If you're looking to connect with him and ask any questions, he's also on Twitter, or X, we should say. Is there anywhere else you would like our people to find you, or anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today, Alex?
No, I'd say that those are the main things. And what do I try and do on platforms like LinkedIn or X or through my books is just to make scientific research and insights accessible and practical and actionable for a general audience. Again, it's not just I'm touting my own research, but any research that I believe to be interesting and relevant.
Well, we're super grateful that you were able to join us here today at the Leadership Launchpad Project. You've definitely helped our mission. Our mission is to change the way the game of life, leadership, and business is being played forever through this human-centric, new school, neuroscience-backed, data and research-driven best practices here in 2024 in the leadership development world. And we couldn't have done any of that unless we had the vigorous research and data that you have been able to provide practitioners like us with. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please remember to hit subscribe. We are on all major podcast platforms. If you're looking for leadership development and training services, you can find all that information over at our website, elitehighperformance.com. This has been so much fun. Alex, thank you again for being here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.